This is a versus between Shibuya and Chimera Ant arc. I'm gonna explain which one is better. Ain't no nostalgia or recency bias coming to factor in this video. These are arguably two of the most popular arcs in anime history, with one being placed in top 10 arcs of all time conversations, and the other being named as the best new gen anime arc. To judge these arcs, three criteria are going to be used. The first one is wow factor, which is a combination of how good the fights and hype moments that happen in the arc are. The second one is the storytelling and how good it is, and the last one is the pace of the arc. Best out of three wins. So yeah, let's see who the winner is gonna be. This is the best criteria to start off with. As anime fans, the first thing that gets our attention when we start at an anime are the fights, the hype moments, the rage moments. You know, all the good stuff. This is what gets us off our seats and want to defend our favorite shows. I said that this video is going to be fair, and I'm sticking with that. So to judge the fights of both series, I'm going to go based off the manga and not the anime. As if I go strictly off the animation, this is gonna easily go to JJK. There's no way around it. The animation of a show from 10 years ago can't compare to the animation of a show in 2024. It's not possible. Especially with a show like JJK that has MAPPA as the producers. Yeah, we gotta level the playing field. Going off the manga is simply gonna be the fairest ways to analyze the fights of both series. When it comes to fights, both series have a lot to work with based strictly off of their power systems, as it's a general consensus that Nen and Jujutsu are one of the best power systems in all of anime. Because of this, the battles are handled in rather creative ways that typically push the mold of what type of battles we see in anime and manga. For the fights though, we're strictly going off of how exciting they are from a pure battle context and nothing else. In the Chimera Ant arc, we're mostly treated to quantity rather than quality. A lot of the battles we get with the ants in this arc are frankly not that memorable, if we're being honest. We have battles like Morel vs Chidu, which is just watching and observing with little to no combat. It's a situation where it's like figure out the opponent's net abilities while being cautious to avoid losing. There are about 4 or 5 fights like this in the arc, and they're just rather boring if I'm being honest. And it's not like there's anything wrong with this style of battle per se, but when most of the battle is an observe and be cautious while the opponent tries to bait you templates, the stakes frankly have to be there and your abilities have to be exciting too. Not abilities like, oh, you have to touch me before the hourglass runs out, or I'm throwing darts at you. Like, come on bro, we can do better than that. King Crimson versus Metallica, Jack the Reaper versus Hercules, Sasuke versus Deidara. These are examples of fights that follow the same exact templates but are way better in quality compared to the same type of fights we got in the Chimera Ant arc. Now, this is not to say all the battles in the arc are like this. We do have the encounter with the Phantom Troop and the Ants, which is your typical flex your abilities off to either destroy the enemies or level the playing field type of battle. All the troop members had amazing battles, some better than the others though. But no one can argue that the battles we got with the Phantom Troops weren't exciting, great, and memorable. The issue here is that we only got these type of battles 2 more times in the arc, and that's with Yuppie versus Killua and Gon versus Pito, which again are one of the most memorable and exciting battles in the arc. So it just kind of sucks that we didn't get more of this type of battles in the arc, because when we did, they did deliver. Another thing that's lacking from the Chimera Ant arc are pure combat intensive fights. From a pure combat perspective, the fights we got in this arc are pretty average at best. You look at fights like Goku vs Jiren, Ichigo vs Ikiola, and Saitama vs Boros. The only fight in the whole arc that matches up to this type of fight from a combat perspective is Mariam vs Netero. Aside from Mariam vs Netero, the only fight that has passable combats in this whole arc is the training with Gon and Knuckle. And that's the problem. I think the ratio of good to great fights to bad to mid fights in this arc is about 3-7. There are just so many mediocre fights in this arc. The Hunter's encounter with Poof and Yuppie, while from a narrative perspective is great, but just strictly from a battle and entertainment perspective, is pretty underwhelming. It's kind of disappointing when in the climax of the arc, the battles we get use the hit and run gimmicks. Not to say that fights has to be strictly combat intensive, but hey bruh, it's literally a fight. That's kind of like the whole point, if we're being honest. I mean, you gotta give us something to work with, especially when we're in the climax of an arc. At that point, that's when everything should be settled and we get a confrontation between the good guys and the bad guys in a pure combat perspective. In my opinion, I feel Poof and UP were done dirty compared to Pitou. I mean, just look at what Pitou got with Gun and look at what they got. It's kind of night and day, to be honest. Now we move on to Shibuya, and even though we removed the animation to make this fair, I still believe JJK has a massive advantage here. Not only are JJK fights peak combat, which you know is mostly what fights are supposed to be about, but the combat in JJK is always visually captivating and high stakes. I mean, just look at what's essentially a filler fight in Shibuya, Yuji versus the Grasshopper Chorus Spirit. That fight, strictly from a pure combat perspective, is better than most of the fights in Chimera Ant arc, bar Netoro versus Miriam, of course. And what we have in Shibuya is mostly quality over quantity when it comes to fights. Most of, if not all of the fights in Shibuya have amazing combat that's blended with high stakes. And even though the quantity of fights isn't up there, that doesn't mean we only get one style of battle in the whole entire arc. We got the same type of hit and run gimmicks that they used with Poof and UP in Shibuya, and that was with the Disaster Curses versus Gojo. And I think we can all agree, even though that fight uses a hit and run style template, that fight with Gojo versus the Disaster Curses is still a treat to watch and very high stakes. It ain't no secret, but like I said earlier, there's a direct correlation with how entertaining a fight is and how combat intensive the fight is. You look at fights like Gon versus Noku, Shizuku versus Pike, and Morel versus Leo, and these are some of the better fights in the Chimera Ant arc. When some of the more forgettable fights in Shibuya, like Megumi and Yuji versus Awakasa, Mei versus the Smallpox Deity, and Mahito versus Mekamaru can match these fights that I mentioned from the Chimera Ant arc, yeah, that's how you know it really is a wash. I purposely avoided the heavy hitters of Shibuya to play fair to the Chimera Ant arc, but hey, it's a wash and the fights easily go to the Shibuya arc. Moving on, for hype and impactful moments, both arcs bring their A-game in this section. Gon's awakening, Gojo getting sealed, Netero raiding the palace, Sukuna's reawakening, Pitou killing kites, Nanami bodying Haruta, Rose bomb exploding, Yuji's him moment, and that's not even listing everything. Both arcs are filled to the brim with some of the most memorable moments in all of anime history. I know most people might lean towards the moments from the Chimera Ant arc, as most of those moments have more sentimentality to them and are just not straight up hype moments like the one in the Shibuya arc. That kind of leads into the next criteria that I'm going to talk about though. But when it comes to moments, I think both arcs are dead even. The Shibuya arc had the whole anime community on lock when it was airing weekly. So let's not forget about this. To try to say that the moments from Shibuya don't compare to the moments from the Chimera Ant arc is just simply going off of nostalgia and not giving the new kids on the block a chance. It's just refusing to acknowledge how impactful the moments from the Shibuya arc are, and they really were. Some of them did cross over to the mainstream. When it comes to fights, it goes to Shibuya. When it comes to moments, it's dead even. So for this criteria, it goes to Shibuya, which means Shibuya is up 1-0 in the score tally. And dare I say, I think this section went pretty handily to Shibuya. For this criteria, the storytelling of Shibuya ranges from good to great at points. There's a clear and easy structure that's easy to follow and understand because of the central conflict that was established when Gojo was sealed into the prison realm. The stakes that are established because of this really set up the atmosphere and puts a lot of tension in the story. Without Gojo, the Jujutsu world will most definitely change in the worst way possible. And it's because of this tension that we're kept invested from the very beginning all the way to the end. Rarely is there a dull moment in this arc, if at all. There's just always something to keep us, the viewers, interested. Additionally, the story's consistency with always being able to maintain high stakes plays into factor with keeping us engaged. The loss of Gojo introduces immediate consequences that ripple through the series. This leads to a sense of urgency with the main cast that allows unexpected twists and turns to be introduced in the story without ever feeling forced. I really commend Gege for not following typical anime tropes when you most expect them. Too many times an arc might get predictable as it plays out, but that's definitely not the case here. And yeah, it's because of this unpredictability that Gege is able to play with our emotions for better or worse. I know a lot of y'all still ain't recovered from the deaths in Shibuya. And the emotional weight we all feel from this arc, well, it's really because of Yuji, if we're being honest. Gege does a great job of putting us in his shoes, which gives us a first-person view of all the struggles he goes through in this arc. This struggle that Yuji goes through, it allows us to see and even feel all sorts of emotions. And that's a very important part of storytelling, because I believe as great our moments are, they're just that, moments. It's the emotions that we get from these shows that really connect and attach us to it, and makes us rave about the show to our friends, to be honest. Us being able to get all these sorts of emotions while the narrative switching between various battles and perspectives seamlessly without taking away from the main storyline is why Shibuya is one of the best new gen anime arcs. One last thing I don't see people mention is the atmospheric setting of Shibuya itself. Not only is it Halloween, but the city being in crisis brings out the human elements of the sorcerer struggle, showcasing their courage and determination in the face of all these challenges. Scenes of civilians being trapped in terror in the subways and the streets really add to the tension of the story. Same with the destruction and the chaos that happens in the city. All help to amp up the stakes of the arc and put into perspective the repercussions that would occur if Gojo isn't unsealed. This point isn't anything too crazy, but I just felt it was something worth a note, so I mentioned it. Now, everything I mentioned about the Shibuya arc, imagine being able to do all of that, execute it better, and even add further elements that add layers and details to the story. That's what the Chimera Ant arc really is, to be honest. It's just on a whole other level. I believe this is peak storytelling, not just in anime, but in general. There's a reason why this arc is seen as one of the best arcs of all time, and the storytelling is a huge chunk of that reason. Honestly, covering everything about how good the storytelling of this arc is could be its own separate video. So what I'm just going to do is highlight some elements of storytelling that the Chimera Ant arc does that's either not present in the Shibuya arc or not done as well. And the first one I want to mention is subplots. The Chimera Ant arc has various subplots that complement and enrich the main storyline. The most notable ones being Miriam and Komugi's bond and Kite's fate. But what's so great about this subplot is that they're seamlessly integrated to the main narrative of the story. I say this because they do a lot for the story, and I mean a lot. Such as offering huge character development, maintaining and increasing tension in the story, and offering a philosophical exploration of the themes that Togashi presents to us in the story. Which leads to my next point. There's so many layers of thematic depth in the Chimera Ant arc. And I think the first one we all notice is the whole humans versus monsters theme that's going on in the story. What really makes you a human if you think about it, and what really makes you a monster? What separates both, to be honest? Were the Chimera Ants monsters because they were ants, or were they monsters because of the human personalities they inherited? We even see this with Miriam, as he had a personal dilemma for most of the arc and wasn't really sure which side he fell onto, humans or monsters. We also have themes like redemption and change, as we see this with Miriam and Komugi. Not just that though, we also see it with Meloran and Ikago as they switch sides from the ants to help the hunters. But one of my favorite themes in the whole arc was the dynamics of loyalty that was explored through the royal guards. We saw how loyalty can be a virtue and a flaw depending on the nature and the motivations behind it. Honestly, there's just a lot to ponder when it comes to this arc because of the amount of themes that were presented to us by Togashi. And it's not just the presentation, it's also the execution. There's a reason why so many people love this arc, and I'll argue the themes, yeah, it gives us a lot to think about. The last thing that's done great in this arc though is the character development. From Gon's anguish and desperation, to Killua's self-discovery and redemption, to Miriam's transformation, and finally to Netero's sacrifice and resolve. The character development that's done in this arc is so well done because we all got to see these characters' internal struggle either lead to them growing or standing firm on their beliefs. It's obviously much more layered and nuanced than that, but like I said, I ain't going too deep in the storytelling or else this video is gonna be like an hour long. What I do know is that this character's journey deeply resonated to you as a viewer, and that's one of the reasons why you love this arc so much. Just like how the wow factor criteria went pretty convincingly to Shibuya, the storytelling criteria goes pretty convincingly to the Chimera Ant arc, which makes the score tied and places everything down to the final category. Pacing is actually one of the most underrated aspects of what not only makes an arc great, but an anime great. It really is the make or break for a lot of people. A lot of you still don't like One Piece because of the really slow pacing at specific points in the story. Same reason why you probably dropped Chainsaw Man Part 2. Slow pacing is a killer. The same thing goes with extremely fast-paced shows like Devilman Crybaby or Solo Leveling. The whole connection with the show isn't properly established, so there's a chance you might not get super invested in the series, and it will eventually become like any other series to you. What you're looking for when it comes to pacing is something right down the middle. JJK is a new gen anime, so the pacing is naturally much more faster than a lot of old gen anime, and you can see this in Shibuya. But I don't think the pacing is much of an issue when it comes to JJK, and let me explain why. Aside from the fights with the smallpox deity, the Grasshopper Cross versus Yuji, and Megumi and Yuji versus Awakasa, nothing else really feels like it's just there to pad runtime in the show. Actually, wait, maybe the whole Nanami. You know what? Let's just not get to that. Whatever. Mappa, yelling slick. But yeah, every interaction is worthwhile and feels integral to the arc. There are no extra characters, the story is always moving consistently, and yeah, I know, sure, there could be some moments where we need a breather, specifically an example being a break in between the Sukuna vs Mahoraga fight and Yuji confronting Mahito, but this is more of a suggestion rather than a complaint. The storytelling of Shibuya only complements the story and further adds to the experience for the viewer. Now for Chimera, it's kind of a mixed bag, to be honest. There are stretches of the arc where the pacing is amazing, and there are stretches of the arc where I'm just like, bruh, what is going on? Like, I'm like pulling my hair, like, seriously? Like, what is going on? And I believe the main reason for this is one thing. There's an excess amount of characters in this arc. I see a lot of people and I'm like, who are these niggas? Like, who are y'all? Like, where did y'all come from? Hina, Bolster, Wolfen. I just named some people to y'all might not remember, and if y'all do remember them, you don't care. Don't act like you do, cause you don't. These are just some of the ants that got excess screen time for no reason, and I don't know why. A lot of the ants got a lot of screen time. Still though, aside from the excess characters, I'd say the arc's pacing really suffers in the middle parts. Let's just be honest, the whole preparation to take down the Royal Guards and Miriam is very slow. From a date episode with Palm and Gun to the episode where Kilo and Gun fight Noni Mance, there were just points in the shows that it just felt like runtime was being padded, which is kind of disappointing because we got a couple of episodes with the Phantom Troop and the Ants. That also is runtime being padded. Take out both moments I just mentioned, the Palm Date episodes, Gun and Kilo fighting those Noni Mance, and the Phantom Troop episode, and the Chimera Ant arc will still play out exactly the same way. Nothing would change, which shows that Togashi could have easily placed more engaging content to pad the runtime. But hey, it's just a suggestion. Okay, I'm complaining, to be fair, but it's a suggestion and a complaint. Instead of the Palm Date episode, switching that with an episode checking up on Lerium or Kurapika would have been amazing. The middle part of Chimera Ant arc is very similar to Wano Arc 2, and trust me, that is not a good comparison to have. Still though, those are my only complaints when it comes to the pacing of the Chimera Ant arc. Aside from the scene of Ikago looking for Palm in the final stretch of the arc, the final episodes in the arc are actually well paced. Sure, the structure and the flow can be all over the place because a lot of things are moving on at the same time, but it's really not anything to be mad about. It's just like a whole lot of things that we gotta get to, so it tends to be all over the place at times. For me, the beginning and the end of the arc are very well paced. I just can't ignore the middle part though. The story of the Chimera Ant arc is like having a Lamborghini, but the pacing is like having that Lamborghini in New York. You can't even drive it anywhere. You're stuck in the middle of traffic all the time. So what the hell is the point? While the story of Shibuya is like having a Chevrolet Camaro. It ain't a Lambo, but it's still a Camaro. Not only that, but the pacing is like living in Texas. You got miles and miles of highway to drive that bad boy to the max anytime you want. And that's why when it comes to pacing, I give a slight edge to Shibuya over the Chimera Ant arc. Shibuya is just more consistent from the beginning to end when compared to the Chimera Ant arc. When it comes to pacing, obviously. That gives the edge to Shibuya and puts the final score tally to 2-1, which makes it the better arc. But hey, that's just my opinion though. Let me know which arc you think is better in the comment section. Don't say it's better just cause. Be more creative, bruh. Like, please. But hey, that's all for me. Until next time, peace out, y'all.